Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Suburban Rifleman. Finally, we're doing a video that doesn't involve an AR-15. This is another project that has been slowly developing over time. I did two videos featuring this rifle. This is my M1950 Belgian Mauser carbine made by FN in Herstal in the 1950s, chambered in 30-06. And I already did an in-depth video on the construction of this rifle, how I built it up. And then I did another video where I was shooting it, and I was actually pretty pleased. I don't know that they were the greatest videos that I ever made, but I was very pleased with the performance from the rifle itself. We were shooting reasonably accurately. This is an original FN Mauser barrel. I didn't change the barrel out. And I just went back and rewatched that video this afternoon, and I was getting a little bit over inch groups, I think about 1.5 inches, something like that. And then I stretched the legs on that rifle. We shot, I think, out to 240 yards. And then this was at my old range where we had steel at nearly 400 yards. And I think I was even hitting steel at close to 400 yards with the rifle. So I was pretty pleased with the rifle's performance. But there were a couple of things I didn't care for too much, and I didn't really point that out in the last video. So we managed to film one video successfully. I've shot the rifle a couple of times since then, but there's been one ongoing thing that I'm always reluctant to talk about, and that's recoil. This rifle is not particularly lightweight, but it does have a fairly short barrel. I think this barrel comes in at right around 20 inches, which is pretty short for 30-06. And the recoil on this is not horrendous, but it's not inconsiderable either. It's actually kind of unpleasant. And I haven't really been able to figure out why that is, because again, the rifle's not particularly lightweight. It's got a very nicely designed ergonomic stock on it. It's got to be the short barrel. And I'm kind of hesitant to ever talk about recoil at all, unless it's to mention that it's practically non-existent, because if you say that it's significant, immediately all the trolls come out of the woodwork to inform you what a delicate flower you must be not to be able to handle shooting a 30-06 or a 35 Remington or whatever. But I'm telling you, this rifle is not very nice. And I can't even tell you how many 30-06s I've had. I must have fired thousands of rounds of 30-06 ammo over the years. I'm very familiar with the 30-06, but this rifle is just unpleasant. I just don't know how else to put it. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about this rifle, driving in the car, thinking about what can I do? And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is a muzzle brake. Unfortunately, this rifle doesn't have a threaded muzzle. And I thought about, well, maybe I pull the barrel, turn it down, thread the muzzle, and put a decent brake on here and see how that works. But that kind of defeats the purpose of this rifle. If you go back and watch my earlier video, the whole point behind this build was to invest the minimum amount into it. I took parts. Almost everything you see on this rifle is parts that I had laying around, and it was my COVID quarantine project to take a bunch of parts that I had just around the house and build a working rifle. So as soon as I unscrew the barrel out of the action, I'm going to start thinking about, well, maybe I should just buy a Criterion or some other high-end barrel, and then it snowballs into something else and something else. So I was looking for a simpler solution. And I have some manufacturing experience. I've been working in a machine shop for years, part-time. And I know that you can make a good mechanical connection clamping. It's not maybe as good as threading, but there's a lot of industrial applications where a clamped connection is good enough. So I started wondering, does somebody make a clamp-on muzzle brake that's worth anything? I came of age in the 1990s when there were all kinds of cheap SKSs and Mauser Nagants and things on the market. And there were a lot of companies that were making cheap, junky clamp-on muzzle brakes. And of course, from 1994 to 2004, we were operating under the federal assault weapons ban. And that was one of the provisions of that you couldn't have a threaded muzzle. So there were clamp-on brakes aplenty, but they were mostly terrible. But it started to occur to me that there might be some companies that make clamp-on brakes that aren't terrible. I think I came up with this idea when I was driving to my parents' house, and when I went home, I started doing a little research, and sure enough, there's a couple of companies that make pretty well-regarded clamp-on muzzle brakes. One of them is Witt machine. They seem to be sort of the preeminent maker of clamp-on brakes. I was able to find more reviews of them than any other, so I thought, well, that's the route I'll go. And it wasn't cheap. I think these sell for, I think I bought mine on some sort of Memorial Day sale, maybe for $80. So they're not super cheap, but they're not super expensive either. And as you can see, it's a pretty bulky brake. It looks like the sort of attachment that you'd see on the end of an artillery piece. It's sort of flattened. It has 5 expansion chambers, 5 baffles. You send Witt machine the dimensions of your barrel. You take a measurement at the muzzle, then you take another measurement, I think 1.5 inches back. And they use that to custom machine the clamping collar. The clamping collar is held in place by 4 machine screws. I thought about using like green Loctite and red thread locker on the screws themselves, green Loctite on the barrel, and then red Loctite on the clamping screws. But Witt machine tells you to use blue Loctite on the barrel, blue Loctite on the screws, and I thought, well, okay, we'll do this the way that they tell you to do it. They certainly probably know more about muzzle brakes than I do. And I watched a couple of video reviews and I read a couple of reviews. I think one guy has one of these mounted on a 300 Win Mag and has hundreds of rounds through it, said that he clamped it up exactly as the instructions said, and it's never moved with hundreds of rounds of 300 Win Mag through the brake. So I'm very interested to try this thing. Obviously, recoil is subjective, so I'm not really going to be able to measure that, but I can tell you whether or not this is extremely unpleasant to shoot once I've had a chance to shoot it. In addition to the 5 chambers and the 5 large brake ports out to the side, there are 2 rows of pairs. There's 20 ports altogether running along the top of the brake to port some of the propellant gases upwards to try to keep the muzzle down. In the last video, this rifle was jumping around like a flea on a hot brick. I'll splice in some video so you can see that. So hopefully that'll help keep the muzzle down a little bit. The rifle is very nicely machined. They engraved the information that I gave them, my muzzle dimensions on the bottom of the brake. They engraved the caliber on the bottom of the brake. The machining looks very nice. It's a mean looking unit, but I don't think it's terribly ugly. The one thing I do find a little bit disconcerting is the diameter of the port in the end of the brake. They ask you the caliber that you're going to be using the brake on. Of course, I'm using a 30-06, so I told them 308. From what I know, my good friend Johan is a very talented gunsmith in South Africa. I had the chance to watch him building suppressors in his shop. South Africa, by the way, is very cool about suppressors, as are many countries, but not ours. So suppressors are completely legal there. And he was showing me how he goes through the process of making a suppressor. And he told me that when you're porting, when you're making the hole in the end of the suppressor, and pretty much any muzzle device, you should make it about 20 thousandths larger than the diameter of your bullet to give clearance. You don't want to baffle strikes. You don't want to hit the suppressor at all with the bullet, but you want to keep as much of that propellant gas inside the device as possible. So 20 thousandths was his rule of thumb. The hole in the end of this muzzle brake is, I think, I gauged it at 375. It should be 328 to be 20 thousandths over. It's 375, so it's 3 times the amount of clearance of what my friend told me. So we'll see. I don't know much about making muzzle brakes. Apparently Witt machine's been at this a long time, and I will know immediately when we fire this whether or not it's working the way it should, because If this thing isn't painful to shoot, I will be extremely happy. The other thing to take into account is that a muzzle brake can change the barrel harmonics. So I do have 2 targets set up at 100 yards. When I shot this rifle a year and 7 months ago, I was getting 1.5-inch groups at 100 yards. So hopefully this doesn't ruin my accuracy. Who knows, maybe it'll make it better, but we'll check those targets when I'm done shooting. So I think I'm going to fire 3 rounds at each of those targets. Well, we'll make it 4 rounds. I have an 8-round end block stripper clip. By the way, this is Lake City M2 ball, made in 1974. Good ammo. So these are coming out of 8-round end block clips for an M1 Garand. So we'll go ahead and fire 2 4-shot groups, 1 at each target, and we'll check those out. So before we lose any more light, let's do that. I imagine with this short barrel and this not insignificant ammunition, I had some serious muzzle flash before. I imagine the muzzle blast is going to be pretty impressive out of this muzzle brake. So I framed the shot. Hopefully we'll catch some interesting fire coming out of the end of the barrel. We'll see. And one other change that I made is I'm using a real Harris bipod now. In the last video, I was using a Chinese Harris clone, which some of those are better than others, but that one is not a particularly good one. It was, I think I bought it for like $20 out of the sporting goods department at my local Walmart, maybe 20 years ago. Not super great. This one seems to be a lot more stable, so hopefully that will help with accuracy as well. All right, let's see how this thing does. Do I get a punch in the shoulder, or will it be nice? Wow. I mean, there's still recoil there. You're still getting a good push, but that is an enormous difference. That's incredible. Okay, Witt machine, I am convinced. Apparently you know what you're doing. I would say that was like my 270. Maybe less. Not unpleasant at all. And unlike the SJC comp on my 223, which is extremely efficient and very nice, I'm not getting blasted in the face. These ports go straight out to the side. They're not angled backwards. When I shoot my Howa, and that's only a 223 with the SJC Titan brake on it, I can actually feel the hairs on my arm blowing. I'm not really noticing a lot of muzzle blast here at all. I imagine if somebody was on one of these other benches, they'd be feeling it though. So I'm going to go down and take a look at that and see how we did. So we had a massive shift in the point of impact. So we're going to go way down. I've got to move like 10 inches down. Now it's a lot warmer today, but I can't imagine that would account for almost 10 inches, maybe more than 10 inches high. So these are 1/4 inch clicks, so we'll go 40 clicks down. And I'm about 3 inches right. So I've got to come left about 12 clicks. So we'll try another 4 rounds here. Hopefully we get on target this time. I mean, at least on paper. I just want to see what's happened to my group sizes. I don't care if it's exactly zeroed. I can stay almost on target. I could probably call my shots if I was shooting at an open berm. We have these enclosed target holders, but let's see how we are now. It's like shooting an SKS. How hot is my barrel getting? It's warm. Not terrible. The brake looks like it hasn't moved at all. I'm gonna go down and check my target again. All right, so target number 1. This is actually group number 2. My first group was up here somewhere. I was hitting the middle frame, but luckily I was able to see bright spots there and adjust accordingly. And I adjusted down just the right amount, but it looks like I adjusted a little bit too far to the left. This would not be a bad group, probably around 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I don't know, this was probably me rather than the rifle, but it looks pretty good. I'm going to move my crosshairs about 2 inches to the right, and we'll see what group number 2 looks like. All right, so that was not terribly impressive. I've moved my scope reticle 8 clicks to the right. I'm going to fire another 4-shot group at my other target and see if I can do a little bit better. Here we go. And here is my second 4-inch group at 100 yards. And that's probably center to center, just about 2 inches. Perfectly centered. I think for a 70-year-old rifle with a 70-year-old barrel on it that's had untold thousands of rounds through it, I don't think you could ask for much more than that. I will take that any day of the week. All right, so I think we can work with this. I'm going to move the camera around behind me, and I'm going to try using up these last 4 rounds, shooting at a steel plate at 200. It's red. I don't know if you'll be able to see it too well. We're losing a lot of light here, but I want to try ringing the gong at least 4 times. I don't know if you'll be able to see the gong out there, but it's at the top left of that plate rack against that tan berm all the way out at the end of the range. That's 200 yards. So we'll see if you can see it or not. I'm going to try to hit it a few times here. And then I think we got to wrap it up before the neighbors start complaining. Here we go. Red plate. Hit it. Before I put this muzzle brake on, I could not maintain my view of the target. I can actually call my shots with this brake on here. Hit it again. saw sparks off the target that time, huh? Hit it again. Let's see if we can go 4 for 4 here. Four for 4. Can't complain about that. So, all in all, I'm extremely pleased with this muzzle brake. It makes a remarkable difference when it comes to recoil. I don't have a companion with me at the range today, so I have no idea what the muzzle blast is like out to the sides, but I'm not getting a lot of blowback in my face. It seems as though it might have had a slightly adverse effect on accuracy, but I won't really be able to tell that until I go home and take a look at some of my other targets. But as you can see, I can still hit I guess that's about a 10-inch metal plate at 200 yards. This is not intended to be a target rifle. It's not a scope testing rifle or anything like that. This is a utility rifle. I've got a fixed 4-power scope on here. This is a grab and go utility rifle. And I think to that end, the Witt machine clamp-on muzzle brake made a huge improvement. So we'll certainly play around with this again in the future, but it's time to start moving on to other things. This is the 3rd time this was on the channel, so let's try something new. When I do that, I hope to see each of you here then. Later, guys.